I still don't know why we decided to go there. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a time to relax and forget about our hectic lives. But that cabin, deep in the woods, changed everything. It all started when my friend Mike found the place online. "It's perfect," he said, showing us pictures of the cozy little cabin surrounded by trees. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just us and nature. At first, it sounded like a dream. We could escape the constant noise of the city and enjoy some peace and quiet. So, we packed our bags and drove out to the middle of nowhere, excited for a weekend of relaxation. The drive was long, and the further we went, the more isolated the road became. Tall, dark trees lined the narrow path, blocking out most of the sunlight. By the time we reached the cabin, it was already late afternoon, and the shadows of the forest were stretching longer across the ground. The cabin looked just like the pictures, small, rustic, and surrounded by towering trees. There was a little porch with a couple of old rocking chairs, and the windows were covered with thin, white curtains that fluttered in the breeze. But as soon as we stepped out of the car, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was too quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves. Just silence. "Creepy," Sarah muttered as she grabbed her bag. She was always the cautious one in our group, and I could see the unease in her eyes. "Come on, it's just a cabin," Mike laughed, slapping her on the back. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you." We unloaded our bags and headed inside. The cabin was simple, a small living room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. It smelled like wood and dust, like it hadn't been used in a long time. That first night, we sat around the fireplace, talking and laughing like we always did. But as the hours passed and the fire died down, the mood began to shift. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, and the silence outside became more oppressive. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself that it was just the isolation getting to me. But then, late at night, I heard something. It started as a soft, creaking sound, like footsteps on old wood. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, trying to listen. The cabin was pitch black, with only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. The creaking grew louder, closer. It was coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear, afraid to move. Then, the doorknob slowly turned. I froze, watching as the door inched open. A sliver of moonlight spilled into the room, illuminating the doorway. I could barely make out a figure standing there, tall, shadowy, and unmoving. "Mike," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, silent and still, like it was watching me. I wanted to scream, to get out of that bed and run, but my body refused to move. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure backed away and disappeared into the darkness. The door creaked shut, and I was left alone in the silent room, shaking with fear. The next morning, I told the others what happened, but they brushed it off. Mike said it was probably just a dream, and Sarah suggested it could have been the wind. But I knew what I saw. That figure was real. The second night was worse. We were all on edge, the cheerful atmosphere from the first day long gone. Every little noise seemed amplified in the stillness of the cabin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Around midnight, the creaking started again. This time it was louder, echoing through the cabin like something heavy was moving across the floor. We all heard it. Mike grabbed a flashlight and led the way down the hallway, his hand shaking as he pointed the beam of light ahead. The creaking stopped just outside the living room. We stood there, staring at the empty space, our hearts pounding in our chests. There was no one there, but the air felt thick with tension, like we weren't alone. Suddenly, the rocking chair on the porch began to move, creaking back and forth slowly. We all jumped, staring at the door that led outside. The chair rocked on its own, even though there was no wind. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. None of us had an answer. That night, none of us slept. We huddled together in the living room, keeping the flashlight on and the fire burning. Every creak, every whisper of wind outside sent us into a panic. We were all thinking the same thing: we needed to leave, but it was too dark to risk driving through the forest at night. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, we packed our things and left the cabin. The drive back felt endless, the trees closing in around us as if the forest didn't want to let us go. When we finally made it back to civilization, none of us spoke about what happened. We were just happy to be out of that place. But the memory of that cabin, of the figure in the doorway and the rocking chair that moved on its own, still haunts me. I don't know what we encountered in those woods, and I don't want to know. All I know is that we'll never go back to that cabin again. My name is Mark. I'm 28 years old, and up until a year ago, I never believed in anything paranormal. Ghosts, curses, haunted places, none of it seemed real to me. But after what happened in that cabin, I've changed. I don't tell people about this often because most wouldn't believe me, but it's a story I feel like I need to share, even if just to get it off my chest. It all started when my friends and I decided to rent a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be a fun, relaxing time to catch up and take a break from our busy lives. The group included me, Greg, Emma, and Tom. We'd all been friends since college, but as life went on, we'd drifted apart. This trip was meant to bring us back together. Greg found the cabin online. It looked perfect in the pictures, a cozy little place nestled deep in the woods with a porch, a fire pit, and not a neighbor in sight. The listing boasted about the peaceful location and the stunning views of the surrounding forest. The price was much lower than we expected, which seemed like a bonus at the time. Now I realize it should have been a warning. We left early on a Friday morning, packed into my old SUV with our bags, snacks, and enough beer to last the weekend. The drive took about 5 hours, and as we got closer to the cabin, the landscape began to change. The trees grew taller, their branches thicker, and the sunlight seemed to struggle to break through the canopy above us. The road narrowed to a single lane, and there were no signs of life, no houses, no cars, nothing. By the time we arrived, it was late afternoon. The cabin looked exactly like it did in the photos, small, rustic, with a sloped roof and a little porch. But standing in front of it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and there was a strange silence all around us. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness. Is it just me, or is this place a little creepy? Emma asked as she stepped out of the car, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Come on, it's perfect. We're in the middle of nowhere. No noise, no stress, just peace and quiet. I nodded, though the unease in my gut refused to go away. Yeah, it's probably just the woods. We're not used to all this nature. We grabbed our bags and headed inside. The cabin was simple. One large room with a small kitchen, a living area with an old couch and a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms in the back. It smelled like wood and dust, like it hadn't been used in a while. The furniture was old but sturdy, and there were a few paintings of forests and mountains on the walls. After settling in, we decided to explore the area. There was a small trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the woods, and we figured it would be a good way to stretch our legs after the long drive. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, but we didn't think much of it. As we walked, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead. The silence was unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Anyone else feel like we're not alone out here? Tom asked, his voice tense. Greg chuckled, though there was an edge to it. It's just the woods, man. They can play tricks on you." But Tom wasn't convinced. "No, I'm serious, it feels like someone's watching us." We all fell silent after that, our eyes scanning the trees as we continued down the trail. The further we walked, the more intense the feeling became, like the forest itself was closing in on us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we decided to turn back. That night, we sat around the fireplace, trying to relax and shake off the weird vibe from earlier. Greg and I cracked open a few beers while Emma cooked dinner, and for a little while, it felt like things were back to normal. We laughed, joked, and reminisced about our college days, but as the night wore on, the atmosphere changed. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the wind began to howl outside, rattling the windows. It felt like the cabin was groaning, shifting under some invisible weight. Then, just after midnight, we heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the back door. It was faint at first, like something was brushing against the wood. We all froze, our eyes locked on the door. "What the hell was that?" Emma whispered, her face pale. Greg, always the brave one, got up and grabbed a flashlight. "Probably just a branch or something. I'll check it out." He moved to the door and opened it slowly, shining the flashlight into the darkness. We all held our breath, waiting for him to say something, but he just stood there, staring into the night. "What do you see?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Greg didn't answer. He just stood there, the beam of light trembling in his hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he slowly backed away from the door and shut it. "There's nothing out there," he said, his voice shaky, "but I swear I thought I saw something moving." We all exchanged uneasy glances, and the tension in the room became unbearable. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Something wasn't right. Something was out there watching us. That night, none of us slept well. Every creak, every gust of wind, every little noise sent my heart racing. I kept imagining something creeping through the woods, getting closer to the cabin, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next day, we tried to shake off the fear. We spent the morning fishing by the lake, hoping that being outside in the daylight would help calm our nerves. But the unease never really went away. The whole time, I couldn't stop glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. By the time we headed back to the cabin, the sky was already darkening. As we approached the front porch, I noticed something strange. The ground around the cabin looked disturbed, like someone or something had been walking around the perimeter. The dirt was scuffed, and there were strange marks, almost like claw prints, but too large to be any animal I could think of. "Did you guys see this?" I called out, pointing to the ground. Emma and Tom came over, their faces filled with confusion. "What the hell is that?" Tom asked, his voice shaky. Greg frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know. Maybe a bear, but I didn't believe that. The prints were too strange, too deliberate. It felt like whatever had made them had been circling the cabin, watching us." That night was even worse than the first. The wind howled louder, and the scratching at the back door returned. This time, it was more insistent, like whatever was out there was trying to get in. We all huddled together in the living room, every light in the cabin turned on, as if that would somehow keep us safe. No one wanted to check the door again. We were too scared to even move. Then, just past midnight, the scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and we all let out a breath of relief. But that relief was short-lived. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls. It sounded like something had slammed into the side of the house with tremendous force. We all jumped to our feet, eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that?" Emma cried, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "But I don't think we should stay here." Greg nodded, his face pale. "We need to leave, now." We grabbed our things as quickly as we could, not caring about packing neatly or leaving anything behind. We just wanted to get out of there. The cabin felt like it was closing in on us, like the walls were pressing down, suffocating us. As we rushed out the front door and into the car, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. And that's when I saw it. A dark figure standing just beyond the tree line, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its shape was wrong, twisted and unnatural. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The others had seen it too. We sped down the narrow dirt road, not looking back, not stopping until we were miles away. We never talked about what happened after that. We just agreed to never go back. Whatever was in that forest, whatever was watching us from the shadows, I never want to see it again. The cabin at the edge of the forest is a place I'll never forget, but it's also a place I'll never return to. And I hope, for your sake, that you never find yourself there either.